This is Jed Distler, and welcome to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. You can subscribe to this podcast through my Substack page by clicking the link that's in the episode description. Paid subscribers get bonuses such as Piano Maven Zoom meetings where we listen to music together and meet special guests from time to time. So please consider subscribing to help us reach out further into the piano community and to keep this podcast afloat and in production. We are exploring all 32 Beethoven piano sonatas, and this episode brings us closer to the world of the late sonatas with two very different kinds of works. The Sonata number 26 in E-flat, opus 81A, and the Sonata number 27 in E minor, opus 90. And throughout our exploration of the 32 sonatas, I've been recommending two different recordings for each sonata with the aim of not repeating any pianist over the course of the miniseries. One recording I recommend is historic in nature, meaning a mono LP or from 78s or a live archival broadcast version. And the other recording is something that's closer to our time, a stereo, studio, or live recording, or a digital recording. So that means that with the 32 sonatas, we will have discussed 64 pianists by the time we get to the end of the road. The sonata in E-flat, opus 81A, is subtitled Les Adieux, and it's the only one of Beethoven's 32 sonatas that is intentionally programmatic, meaning that Beethoven himself set out the program. He dedicated the composition to his friend and patron, the Archduke Rudolph, to commemorate both Rudolph's departure from Vienna in May 1809 upon the invasion of Napoleon Bonaparte's troops and his return to the city the following year. The introduction's opening motif resembles a horn call that indicates a farewell, and Beethoven symbolically spells out the first movement title, Lebe wohl, farewell, under the first three notes, the doo, doo, doo. Yet there's nothing sad or wistful about the ebullient allegro that follows. The second movement, Abwesenheit, depicts the Archduke's absence in expansive, ruminative terms, while the finale, Das Wiedersehen, celebrates a joyful return. And here, the music's darting scales and headlong momentum are very much in line with other heroically inspired Beethoven middle period finales. So, in a way, this piece retains some of the fervor and energy characterizing Beethoven's big middle period sonatas, like the Waldstein and Appassionata, but in a more compact context, perhaps. For my historic choice, I've picked a recording made on May 31st, 1929 by Leopold Godowsky. Technically, it's absolutely solid and poised, and there are only one or two telltale moments that reveal this pianist's general unease in recording situations. The playing is very straightforward and direct in terms of what we consider good modern Beethoven style, although I cannot honestly say that Godowsky conveys the nervous energy and the sense of tension and release that one finds in Arthur Schnabel's more inflected and urgent brand of Beethoven pianism. But we did recommend Schnabel for Opus 2 number 1, so I can't recommend him all the time. But still, Godowsky's recording is a valuable document of a major pianist in a substantial Beethoven sonata, and we are lucky to have this recording. For the modern choice, I've nominated Van Cliburn. I remember when the American critic B.H. Hagen singled out Van Cliburn's mid-60s recording of Les Adieux for praise, and he found it superior in every way to Godowsky. He made a rather unfair comparison. But I do think that this performance remains Van Cliburn's finest achievement in Beethoven's music on disc. It has the easygoing lyricism and breadth that Cliburn was known for, but it also has power and joyful rhythmic drive in the outer movements, and also Cliburn's effortless dispatching of those difficult and very uncomfortable double note patterns in the first movement will give many of today's hotshot virtuosos pause. Here, I think Van Cliburn the pianist and Van Cliburn the musician triumphantly merge. After Beethoven composed Les Adieux, 5 years passed before he wrote his next piano sonata, the two-movement sonata in E minor, Opus 90. He wrote it in August of 1814, shortly after revising his opera Fidelio. The first movement's terse and compact nature is partly due to the fact that Beethoven eschews a traditional first movement exposition repeat, not to mention how much of the development section is generated from the first theme. At the same time, there's a restless kind of a stop-and-start aura that justifies Charles Rosen's description of the music's quote-unquote despairing and impassioned mood. The second movement follows a strict sonata rondo template with the lovely theme in E major appearing 3 times, and its final iteration appears in the tenor rather than in the soprano voice. Much ink has been spilled over how the music foreshadows Schubert's kind of unpressured lyricism, although the sense of surprise that one gleams from the sudden and quiet accelerando in the final measures is pure, unadulterated Beethoven. This is very much a connoisseur's kind of sonata. My historic choice features a pianist who is known more to connoisseurs than to the general public. The pianist is Ernst Levy, who lived from 1895 until 1981. I recently devoted an episode of my radio program Between the Keys to Ernst Levy's artistry, and I played his recording of Opus 90 on the broadcast. I've provided a link to that episode's webcast in my podcast description so that you can hear for yourself. This recording dates from the mid-1950s and was recorded at the Kresge Auditorium at MIT with Peter Bartok engineering, so that the mono sound is actually quite vibrant and impactful, and so is Ernst Levy's dramatic and dynamically contrasted pianism. For my modern recorded version of Opus 90, I have long held the 1960s recording by Ivan Moravec as a point of reference. His unforced lyricism and his many refinements of touch and articulation are major assets here, especially in the second movement. But there's a strong backbone behind his beautiful sound, which is really apparent in the first movement. And you'll notice his control of those very difficult rapid rotary patterns in the left hand. This is something the pianists will probably notice more than general listeners. Now, had I not cited Sviatoslav Richter's Appassionata a few episodes back, perhaps I would have nominated Richter's 1971 studio recording of Opus 90 as a reference. But Moravec is even more faithful to Beethoven's markings, especially his sudden subito dynamics and phrasings. Actually, Moravec also has a terrific recording of Les Adieux that is worth seeking out. But for both communicative warmth and a firm structural spine, I would nominate Ivan Moravec in Opus 90 for the modern recording recommendation. It still is a standard bearer, and the Ernst Levy recording is wonderful too. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. And we have the Opus 101 Sonata in our next mini-series Beethoven episode. We're now getting into the late sonatas, so hold on to your hats. I look forward to being with you next time.